Good evening and welcome to the Varietal Show. My name is Rory and you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel, which is a YouTube channel for people who just kind of love narrative. And what we do on Tuesday nights, which is not tonight, is we read old folk tales and fairy tales together, sort of enjoy classical narratives. But what we do tonight is we write our own narrative, and this stream, which is a sort of write-along stream, is suitable if you need some company while you're doing some chores or some background, or if you want to write along with me, because basically what we'll be doing is using what's called a solo tabletop RPG to get some prompts, and then we'll try to write kind of a rough draft of a story over the course of an hour. If you just want to know the results, though, or you just want to cut ahead to the writing or whatever else, down in the description below, if this video is no longer live, there will be timestamps to allow you to jump ahead in the show. Obviously, you can't jump ahead when it's live. I see GS is in the chat. GS says, "Good evening, laughing over the great cover art. I can't take credit for that." That's a mixture of things. That's the game we have today. That's one source of it. And then the game, we got it from an artist from the 20s. And I think they just found it because when you type in troll painting into Google Image, that's the first thing that comes up. But it is a beautiful piece of art. Jenna's here. Jenna says, hi, hi. Hello, Jenna. Okay. So, yeah. This is the ride-along stream that may or may not be up your alley. If it is, if you do like it, feel free to come back, subscribe, like, things like that. And if you don't, well, thanks for checking us out. Which means that I need to explain specifically what we're playing tonight. And then we need to get to the prompts. Although this time I will say I already have a bit of a world built for us to work with, because I think it would have taken too long if I didn't. But we'll see. So, this is the main part of the show, called litgames. Litgames stands for literature games, but you can also think of them as like expressive games, lyric games, solo tabletop RPGs, anything that kind of gives prompt structures and just limits that you have to be creative within. And the game that we're playing tonight is called Swamp Troll Witches. Swamp Troll Witches actually recently just did a Kickstarter, I believe, where they were trying to get some of their books printed and sent about. It's a simple game, I think, on the whole, and I actually find it fairly satisfying to play. But for the context of this stream, I'm not going to go into all the rules and character building. If you are interested in that kind of stuff, let me know in the comments. I'll try to find some way to fit that kind of content into videos. But in general, when I start explaining rules, people start leaving the stream. So I try not to, but the basics are this. Everything we do will be decided by rolling 3d6 dice, which is for most people just dice. The d6 stands for how many sides it has. Dice with 6 sides. Exactly what those 3 dice mean and how they're interpreted is interpreted based on various parts of the game. The overall structure of the game, though, without getting too nitty-gritty about it, is we are a little troll, or a big troll. Trolls are traditionally large, but mine is small. I'll show you a picture of mine in a minute. We're a little troll. We live in a swamp. We get, the way you're supposed to start this game, the part that I've already done for you, is we describe our swamp, we describe our hut in the swamp, we describe our little character that we'll be playing, and we describe the night market, which is a place we go to at the end of the week to sell potions that we've made. And the gist of the game is, it's kind of a chore cycle. You get up in the morning, you try to collect ingredients for a potion. I inhaled something I shouldn't. All right. So the gist of it is we make potions using ingredients we collect from our swamp. And the core of the writing is we as a little character walking around our swamp will run into problems as we try to collect our special mushrooms or fanciful plants or whatever else. We might have a frog or something that won't let us take it, or an ornery spirit or something like that. Still in my throat. Yeah, okay, so then basically we roll some dice to figure out what the problems are, and then we decide how we want to resolve them, and then we write little vignettes about that, little short stories. Each potion requires 3 ingredients. We will spend the day trying to make 1 potion. That's the gist of it. I mean, there's other stuff that comes in. There's stats for the character. There's abilities for how you can resolve the situation. But I've already set all that up, and I'll be doing most of the rolling sort of away from you folks and just tell you the results, because we're here to write. But if you do want to try the game, I will have it in the pinned comments below. So that's it. We are a potion maker by trade who lives in a little swamp, who isn't entirely human or human at all. And we're collecting ingredients for potions. So, let me therefore move on to introducing you to my character, who we will be writing about today. Oops. This is Rorgor. And the one thing I can say about this game is that it has a pretty accessible art style. Like, it doesn't require you to be too good at anatomy or anything, as you can clearly see I'm not. But this little guy is my sort of spacey little troll man. He is small. He only comes up to about an average person's knee. And he lives in a swamp, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But he lives in a place that I called the Heineken Hut, because it's technically a beer barrel. This is harder to read. I didn't have time to paint this. This was a sketch I did of his place. I'm not a drawer, by the way. I'm not an artist. I'm a writer. But you can see here it's a barrel he lives in that has a cork on a bit of string and is under an oversized umbrella or mushroom that he purposely made too big, and with a potion. And so the way that he gets out in the morning is he sort of rolls his whole house up out of the water line and then pops the cork. And then there's a little hammock against a tree on the other end there. So that's just to give you a feel for them. I mean, I'm going to mostly tell you a little bit about the environment that I'm in. I don't want us to feel too restrained to this. My version of events doesn't have to be absolute, but just to give you an idea. This is probably too many words to read them all, so I'm just going to read sort of some key stuff. So the first thing is the swamp that we're in, that we're going to travel around and find ingredients, is called Tendervale Swamp. It is a natural bog downstream of the old Windigo brewery, which makes the palest of ales and pours the spare in the river. This unusual disposal process at the brewery has caused the whole swamp to smell of fresh yeasty bread. Also, the ale in the river, as it mixes with the soil, makes a fizzy mud that tickles Rorgor's feet. My little troll's feet. Rorgor, I didn't put a lot of thought into that name if that doesn't show. Rorgor has contributed his share of queerness to this bog as well. His clumsy and careless handling of magical potions has seeped into the roots of many things here. It's said you might find some foamy yeast puddles that'll shout you out should you step on them. Others report berries that grant sweet nectar only if you kiss them on their big cranberry lips. Some even say Rorgor poured an embiggening potion on his mushroom garden, thinking it was just some rainwater, and created a whole strain of gigantic speckled mushrooms. There's some other stuff here, but cutting ahead, the odd confluence of these unusual circumstances has made for a veritable smorgasbord of the right stuff for a good potion, which is one of the reasons why the potion-making troll Rorgor has made it his home. And just briefly on Rorgor of the Full Belly, which is his full name, is a smaller troll for reasons quite unclear. He stands about as high as a normal man's knee rather than as a heaving mountain, which would be typical of his kin and kind. His hair is a long, proud net that catches the loveliest twigs and the dearest critters, most recently a crooning little mole cricket. He can also catch his two lazy eyes popping out from under his hair right above his thick nose, and if the light catches things just right, his feet are hairy and wide, the tops of which rub just slightly at the lowest roots of his jiggly belly. It's unclear if he's ever dressed, but it seems unlikely. No one bothers him about it, though, as nothing untoward is visible between the overhang of his belly and his great mop of hair. So that's Rorgor, and Rorgor is going to go for a walk. Now, here's the thing. What I think is kind of brilliant about this game is you can play it solo. And if friends decide they want to play it too, the game is structured in such a way that you could bring them into it without having to like restructure your character or anything you've done. And the way they do that is you can play as a group walking around, but primarily what they do is they say that you each sort of live in your own little swamps that meets at the same night market, and write each other letters about your days. But there's no reason why they couldn't help come and look for ingredients as well. Like, I think it's a good flexible model of play if you folks really want to try it. I do think it is a fun little game. But for us, we're going to play it and do some writing, which means we need to figure out what potion we're making today. And so the way they do that, and if you've watched me do any of these streams before, you know how greatly I appreciate this. They have rolling tables for that. I don't like it when I buy one of these tabletop games and they give you no content, just bare bones structure about rolling dice. I feel like that's a bit of a ripoff. Okay, so the table here is called a D66 style table, which doesn't require you to have some weird 66-sided dice. Instead, what it is you roll 2 D6 dice, where one of them is the first number and one of them is the second number. So that's why it starts at 11 and it ends at 66, and it doesn't include every number. So let's figure out what potion we're going to make today. I rolled 2 3s, 33. So what's 33? Is a potion of remembrance. Well, that's very abstract. Guys, what do you think a potion of remembrance would do? There we go. Because as you know, on this show, we invite the contributions of others. By the way, if you guys want to make your own characters and have them interact with Rorgor, I'm happy to do that. If you want to play this game and put in the comments below, as if your character is a friend of mine, about what you got up to on a particular day, I'd be happy to read that. All right, a potion of remembrance. So we're making a potion of remembrance. Jenna says, what a jolly little fellow. And Gia says that would be a cool night market. My night market is run by... I didn't read you the thing about the night market, but it is run by a thing called a kobold. If you follow my fairy tale streams, you'll know what a kobold is, but they're like house spirits. They're not like the D&D ones. That's not what I'm thinking of here. And it's a raft that pulls up along the streams, the outlets of different swamps, and they all meet together on this raft that's run by a little kobold. And the kobold himself buys a lot of the potions and then delivers them from his little sack to people that need them around the countryside, because that is a thing that kobolds do in folklore. Okay, so the first ingredient we have to get. See, they even have a rolling table for this. Love it. Love it. Do more of this indie tabletop RPG, people. Give content. Make me feel creative without actually forcing me to be fully creative. Goose buds, which you'll go, hey, Rory, goose buds aren't a thing. And no, they're not. So we also have to decide what goose buds look like and where they grow. So there's another thing that chat can help me with. What does a potion of remembrance do? And what are goose buds and where do they grow? Any other? Yeah, okay. So we have to roll 2 more times on the potion ingredients because we need 3 ingredients. That is 32, which is Goblin's Balm. Goblin's Balm. By the way, if you guys are like, I have a funny idea for an ingredient, feel free to add it in and we can swap it in for one of them. You don't have to roll for the ingredients. Ooh. Gia says goose buds grow on a giant's warts. Ooh. Oh, grotesque. I love it. All right. 63 are fairy bells. By the way, if you really like this game, I can recommend a video game that is effectively the same premise called Witchwood. Oh, I like that idea. So Jenna makes the recommendation that it could be that it actually helps repair something. But then I like actually the final option here. If we want the more traditional meaning, maybe it means bring a forgotten place back to life, but in an illusion that you can like walk around in to help you remember. I love that. We're doing that. Okay, we have to, a goose buds grew from a giant's warts. Grew from a giant's warts. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is find an ingredient. So that means I need to roll some things, find out if we find it, and then we'll write out how we deal with it. There is something on this list, by the way, called Hagel beans, which I find hilarious. Okay, so we are in the state of exploration. And that means we're going to visit 3 locations. When entering a new location, roll 3d6 and interpret the dice as follow. Now, the order of the dice matters. So, yellow will always be the first dice. Purple will always be the second dice. And green will always be the third dice. Because they have different meanings here. So the first thing, I rolled a 1 on the yellow. That means where we go, there will be no ingredients present. Damn. Okay, so let's make a note of that before I roll the next dice. Now, the second die is the problems. And they have a list of problems we can look at, but we have to figure out the severity of our problems first. So a 6, we just rolled, is a minor problem. And truthfully, these first two are the ones that matter the most. Whether we find our ingredient and whether the problems we encounter are severe or not. But let's roll our third, which is a 2. Okay, so with 2, we are in unfavorable conditions. I'm not rolling well here. Okay. Now I have to figure out what our minor problem is. Maybe Jenna GS says kumquat grease. I think if I say that on the internet it'll ruin me. I know it's actually just a fruit. But what is the description? That only grows on hills and their sap is grease, so it's slippery to climb. Ooh, I like that one though. I do like the description. I may change the name. Jenna says, maybe fairy bells are actual bells that belong to fairies. He has to trade for it. They can still be flowers that sound like bells because fantasy plants are fun. Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. Some of that's going to come down to the rolls. But I do like the idea. I think I said it was a minor problem, right? Yeah. Minor problem means now, to determine the minor problem, I roll 2 dice. Came up with a 15. Angry crows. So we went to where we would have expected to find goosebuds. And instead, we found angry crows. Now, I have to explain how unfavorable conditions work. I will admit, I don't ever feel like I have the best grasp of it, but I believe what it does is it makes it harder to resolve. Yeah, there it is. So while favorable conditions, you apply a +1 modifier. On the other hand, I think there's a 0 for neutral and a -1 for... So in other words, whatever we roll, we'll -1 off it. So now, here's the one thing that is probably too much description for me. So we'll I won't give you all the language that the game has. I'll give you an overview and you guys just tell me what you think we should be doing. But we will have to set up the conflict first. The problem solving comes down to the character sheet. And the character sheet is a proper character sheet, which is a bit unusual for games like this. And stick with me because I'm not going to go too far into it, but I do want to give people a chance to see what the game is like. So there's all these, I'm on the character sheet right now, and there's all this craftiness, personality, brute force, magic, relaxation, determination, and then you decide whether you have to assign some of them you can be good in, some of them a certain amount you have to be bad in, whatever else. Anyways, the point is, brute force would be, for example, pushing them out of the way, or just trying to grab it and run. Whereas things like craftiness would be whatever. It would just be sort of you trying to outsmart them or use magic or whatever else. And then you will roll to see if you succeed, and based on how you set up your character sheet, which I have in my book here, you guys won't be able to really see it, but I have my character sheet set up here. He's set up to be sort of a charisma person, so he can talk his way out of stuff. But what matters here, that's just for people who are interested in the game. What matters for us here is that we solve a problem. So let's start with our problem. Jenna says it's crows nesting season. Perfect. I already have the premise in mind. This probably should be written in first person, but I kind of want to not do it in first person. I feel like it should be a storybook. Little Rorgor. And I do this in that very sort of twee English storybook style, so, I mean, buckle up. Little Rorgor splished, splashed, and splooshed through the fizzy mud of Tendervale Swamp. Keeping a keen but lazy eye out for the imprints of a giant's foot. Rorgor had no conflict or with the giants, but he was also not so friendly with something that might step on him quite as easily as the giants could. No, he was not out for a social visit. Instead, he was crawling over the spongy logs and deep yeasty muds of this land in search for in search for goosebuds. Goosebuds were a peculiar plant. They grew only in the nourishment of what a giant's wart. That's a confusing way to put it. They grew only in giant's warts. GS says, look out, never vex a crow. That's true. Crows are clever, but also with cleverness can come danger. Only in giant's warts. Rorgor, again, nervous. For being stepped upon. Wore a cloak of scrap metal and rusted bells that announced his arrival wherever he went in Tendervale Swamp. GS says, crows need the opposite of the remembrance potion. They need a forgetfulness potion so they don't remember the time you shooed them away. Yeah, isn't that the truth? But the stomping... clomping and clomping... steps of great old swamp giants would not prove an issue that day. Instead, when he reached the giant's home, a carved out massive old redwood, he found the giant had scurried off in such a hurry they had dropped even one of their shoes. Rorgor slumped. I'm making up words. The English can do it, I can do it. Slumped and slopped through the wading, wet silt. You have to make a yogurt potion to counteract all that yeast. I'm still trying to forget yeasty mud. I could say carbonated. It's the champagne of muds. Until he was just in the shadow of the big open door, beset in the side of the massive redwood. Gia says, oh, okay. Yeah, champagne of mud. It's way more appetizing. Hello, giant kin and friend to the little folk. I require a goose bud, and I'm sure your warts are in season. What price could I name? Rorgor. Jen is laughing at the champagne of muds. Tendervale Swamp has the champagne of muds. Fizzy muds from other places are just sparkling. Sparkling slop. Rorgor said, trying to find a bellowing presence in his tiny stature. Alas, the giant did not respond. Jenna says mud secco instead of prosecco. For those who don't know, Prosecco is Italian champagne. I'm sure both sides, France and Italy, would hate me describing it that way, but that's what it is. Alas, the giant did not respond and seemed to be long gone. GS says I didn't know. Yeah, Prosecco is like a little bigger bubbles. Like champagne tends to be finer bubbles. I'm sure that's got something to do with the yeast they use. I find Prosecco was more useful for mixing, whereas like you could generally drink champagne on its own. But it really comes down to the size of the bubbles, right? That you like. Instead, the response came in a series of screeching, hollering, and frightening caws. From great black birds who swooped from the shelves, from the high shelves, I should say, of the giants. From the high shelves of the giant's abode. Rorgor was so befuddled and overwhelmed. Oh, hey, Big Drew's here. Good to see you, Big Drew. Maybe the giant has an insatiable hunger for banana trees, not the fruit, just the trees. I like that. Rorgor was so befuddled and overwhelmed by the bombardment of birds that he huddled into his knees and buried his long nose in the cold, fizzy mud. You're on overtime tonight, Big Drew. I hope they pay you overtime. I hope it's not one of those do us a favor things. You've never said anything that leads me to believe you'd be that kind of person, but I was that kind of person, and I am full of resentment over it. I have so much wage theft in my life that I've just put up with. Rorgor was so befuddled and overwhelmed by the bombardment of birds that he huddled into his knees and buried his long nose in the cold, fizzy mud. But the birds saw the shiny bells. Chunks. The shiny bells woven in his cloak. And began to pick well, let's rephrase this in. However, the bird saw the shiny bells woven in his cloak. They were taken with the greenest of eyes and swooped and began to pick, pluck at his prized cloak. Rorgor had stitched it well. though. And instead of retrieving any of his prized bells, the birds would pick him up and began swinging him about. Okay, now here comes the key question. Of all our options, what do we want to roll to see how we resolve this? There's craftiness. There's brute force. There's with magic. This is all just going to be a roll on a dice. We're trying to make our remembrance potion, GS. GS says, because we have difficult conditions, we can't use our remembrance potion. No, we're trying to collect ingredients, and we came here looking for goose buds, which we need for our remembrance potion. But instead, we found a bunch of crows and no goose buds. So we need to figure out how we want to deal with the crows. GS says, Jenna suggested fairy bell trading. We can do that next. We have to do 3 ingredients. I don't think we're going to get through all 3. But, so, problem solving. In the problem solving phase, the troll witches deal with the problem present at a location in order to be able to collect the ingredients at the location. The problem is too daunting. They may instead flee, but the location still counts towards their total for a day. We can only do 3 in a day. Problem solving takes place in rounds, consisting of 3 steps per round: talking, doing, and fighting. Each troll witch in the game, in whatever order you choose, may take an action. There's only 1 in this. During each step to attempt to solve the problem. A doing action may be replaced by another talking action, and a fighting action may be replaced with another talking or doing action, but not the other way around. Continue attempting to solve the problem for as many rounds as necessary until it is solved, or all of the witches become too bothered and need to go home. The number of successful action rolls required to solve the problem is blah blah blah. This is where it gets into the whatever, but minor problems require 2 successes. So keeping in mind that we're doing this to get prompts for story. Basically what that means is I'm going to roll a d6, and based on the skill we choose, I get a buff. In one, I can rearrange the dice. In another... Well, anyways. I won't say more than that. It's going to get too complicated. But this is... Here, I'll just do it. It's probably too complicated. These words are going through people's heads. You remember yellow is first, purple is second, green is third. Although, depending on what skill I rolled on. So the first one is a talking skill. I'm going to use my personality. Personality means I'm solving words with problems with words. So, with personality, I get a +2 to the first dice, I believe. Which doesn't matter because I rolled a 1 on my first dice, which I think is the second time I rolled a 1 with this thing. And +2 brings me up to 3. That's still failure. So I fail. We're going to have a little scene, part of the scene, where we fail to talk the crows down. But what should we say to talk the crows down is the question I have. Now, the second die tells me the wrinkle. The wrinkle is, even if I fail this, it might do something to help or hurt me on the next roll. In this case, I got a 5. 5 gives me a positive side effect. So while I'm not going to talk them into it, I might be able to... I will get a buff on the next roll based on something that happens here. And then the last one is for flavor, but I'm not going to go into flavor rolls right now because it's already going to be too long. Okay. Yeah, exactly. There you go. GS says what should we say to the crows? To try and talk them down. That fails. Well, he's small enough. He might be worried that he's going to be eaten. Maybe he'll be like, "Don't eat me. I taste like something, and it's something that they love." I think the ultimate solution here has to be him trading some shiny things from his coat for them to let him go, but I don't want to use that yet. Because I think that's got to be the kind of conclusion to this. To be clear, I'm not going to fight the crows. Not going to fight anything in this game. I don't think it suits the mood. Oh. Jenna says, maybe he tries to speak in crow and accidentally says something that is actually horrible. Excellent. Love it. Now, Rorgor... recognized when he finally recognized he was being tossed about by crows. When he finally peered through the fingers he had wrapped over his eyes. For no reason at all. Besides, perhaps, the blind confidence of a slightly dumb creature. Rorgor had convinced himself he knew how to speak crow. His education in the matter Jenna says, I'm just thinking about how when you meow back at a cat sometimes, and then you try and do a different sound, and sometimes they like walk away. Yes, exactly. His education in this matter was restrained to hearing crows in the tree tops and deciding what the various curs and caws meant. He had no real reason to believe he knew crow, but that did not stop little Rorgor from bellowing out a series of cacophonic, rattling screeches, barely approximating a crow's much more pleasant caw. You might imagine that this would do little, if anything at all, good or bad. But Rorgor accidentally did speak Crow. In fact, he insulted the entire Crow community. Bellowing about their mothers in a manner not befitting even the wildest of the polite of the swamp's polite society. So shocked were the crows by these incisive, if slightly mispronounced, insults. So shocked were the crows by this incisive, if slightly mispronounced insults. Their beaks dropped open under wide black eyes and dropped little Rorgor hard in the mud. Okay, next try. This might be our last chance, but we'll see. Jenna said craftiness or magic for the skill. So craftiness, let's remind myself what that means. Used for creative problem solving. I think we could call using our cloak to somehow distract or trade away on the insult or whatever as a part of our as a part of that anyways. So I'll roll it on craftiness. Now, what I have in craftiness is not a buff, but I get to arrange the dice. I have high control, which means that I roll the dice, but I can put them in whatever order I want. So I'm going to roll the 3 dice now, and we'll see what we come. Okay, that's not a bad roll. Because there is no particular order here, I have rolled 2 4s and 1 3. So I'm going to put my first 4 as my first die, which means it will succeed in solving the problem. And the second die will make 4 as well. So there's just no effect on that, but we're not going to have another turn. And the flavor is 3. Wonder if I can... I said I was going to use flavor, but I'm wondering if I can use it here. No, I'm just going to have to accept I don't really understand how flavor works. I know I looked at it a few times, but... I'm just seeing if there's any... Okay. No, there was no rolling table for it, but there was a rolling table for unfavorable conditions, which I think I actually forgot that we rolled unfavorable conditions, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. How exactly... Because obviously Crow's like shiny things. He's got a jacket full of shiny things. But how are we going to arrange it so that, you know, it's interesting to read and a little satisfying? but he uses this jacket to get himself out of insulting the crows and infringing on them in breeding season. I'll open the floor a bit to this because this will be the sort of end of the story, and then we'll read it and we'll finish the day. And by the way, I do really enjoy this game. This is one game that I think I would probably play again. There's a couple that I would play again. I just haven't gotten to the point where I feel like I need to cycle back on anything. But one of the things that's kind of brilliant about it is that you can, it's suitable to kind of online life. So if you follow me on Mastodon or something and you want to send me letters from your character or whatever else, my character is happy to be your friend and hear about your collecting of potions. I think it's a good little, I don't know, little community exercise in just sort of imagining yourself as a little swamp troll witch. I'm gonna have a drink of water. GS has lots of potential options in this game. Yeah, one thing I will do at the end is I will read you a little bit on the night market and the hut. Some of the writing about it. Though I did put this up on my Mastodon. I did it a while ago. Just some of the other stuff about my character. Well, I'll get him up to the point. With a sputter, to clear the mud. He scrambled up in a daze and sputtered to clear his mouth of the thick mud at the giant's doorstep. I like this idea, Jenna. Jenna says maybe he doubles down on his crow speak and starts holding up his jacket to protect himself, but the birds just take it as an offering, as him offering it to him, and he just fails upwards to success. Yeah, I mean, technically we didn't find the goose buds that we're looking for, but for the sake of the stream, especially for people that jump ahead, I may just ignore that and have them trade the goose buds he was looking for. Just to give some closure on it. He scrambled up in a daze and sputtered to clear his mouth of the thick mud. The crows were circling for another dive bomb. Rorgor pulled his dingly old cloak from his shoulders and bore it between his soft, supple belly and the sharp beaks of insulted crows. GS says gotta have a goosebud closure. Jenna says maybe the crows got the goosebud because they were pecking the behind of the giant. Yeah, absolutely. Whoops. My sort of story within a story here, the context here is that the crows chased off the giant because they were nesting there, but I don't think I'm ever going to get to a point where I could say that in the story. But that is the context. So it would make sense that they pecked at the giant too. Crows are vicious in breeding season, which is basically now. Lots of run-on sentences in this one. Dingling old cloak. Swoosh and snap. The crows circled back and back again against the woven old poncho. Rorgor, still of the persuasion that he could speak bird, sputtered up, spit out strings of nonsense cause and gurgling, frankly offensive. Crowish words. But in the dumb luck that had marked out much of his lazy life, Rorgor managed to string together, in the words of peace, he said, whoops, quite unbeknownst to himself, that he wanted no conflict and meant no offense, as he held his bell-ridden garment high. The crows understood this to now be his gift, or perhaps even an apology. Gia says, "Shh, a crow might hear you." Yeah, that's right. Not one. Crows are, well, of course, dignified folk, and so left at his feet a pack of fairly fresh goose buds, plucked from the back of the giant they had driven away from their nest. In the giant's home. But what do crows know of private property? Anyhow. Rorgor was so delighted to find his first ingredient. He mindlessly dropped his cloak in the mud to pick them up. The crows swept in for their perceived gift. And, well, for a moment, Rorgor considered asking in Crow for it back. He instead counted himself lucky, then splooshed off back into Tendervale. Fizzy, mucky mud. All right. I mean, there's a story in that. Simple. Children's level little story. By the way, I called this segment "If I Were a Troll, I Could Afford a Home," which was what I considered titling the video, frankly. Millennial problems. Although I think at this point also Gen Z problems and probably whatever comes after, Gen Alpha or something. Look, we're all hosed. The last people to own houses was Gen X. Okay. Jenna says, not the fizzy mucky mud. Indeed. All right. If you're coming to this part of the show, it's because you just want to know what we wrote and what our final story was, and I'm going to read that now. But just to give you a little context, we were playing a game called Swamp Troll Witches, rather. Swamp Troll Witches looks like this, and you can get it on itch.io, and if you're not watching this live, it's down in the pinned comment below. In the course of that, I came in with a character I'd already prepared, who is Rorgor. And this is Rorgor, his little drawing I did of my character. This is his little hut, a barrel on a swamp under an oversized mushroom. He's comes up to about knee height, which is going to matter for this story. And he wants to go out and find some ingredients for a remembrance potion. And a remembrance potion, of course, I don't need to tell you, is a potion that helps bring a forgotten place back to life, but in an illusion, so you can wander through it to prompt memories. And again, I don't mean to condescend or anything, but the obvious ingredients for that were goose buds, goblin's balm, and fairy bells. And we're going to read a little story about Rorgor's attempts to collect goose buds, which of course grow from a giant's warts. This was decided largely by roles, interpreted by Chad and myself. Little Rorgor splashed and splooshed through the fizzy mud of Tendervale Swamp, keeping a keen but lazy eye out for imprints of a giant's foot. Rorgor had no conflict with the giants, but he was also not so friendly with something that might step on him quite as easily as the giants could. No, he was not out for... This music feels wrong. I'm going to change the music. It's a little melancholy. There we go. No, he was not out for a social visit with the giants. Instead, he was crawling over the spongy logs and deep yeasty muds of this land in search of goose buds. Goose buds were a peculiar plant that grew only from a giant's warts. Rorgor, again nervous for being stepped upon, wore a cloak that was woven through with scrap metal and rusted bells, so that his every step would announce his arrival wherever he went in Tendervale Swamp. King, 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 king. He did this for the stomping and clomping steps of the great old swamp giants would not prove an issue to him that day. So, clinking and clanking and splooshing and splashing, he wandered up to the giant's home, which was a carved-out massive old redwood. But he found the giant had scurried off in such a hurry that they had dropped even one of their shoes and left their door wide open. Well, that was peculiar. So Rorgor slept and slopped through the wading height wet silts until he was just in the shadow of the big open door hanging from the side of the mass of redwood. "Hello, hello, giantkin and friend to the little folk. I require a goose bud, and I'm sure your worts are in season. 'Tis human enough." "What price could I name?" Rorgor said, trying to find a bellowing presence in his tiny stature and shaking his cloak of bells evermore. Alas, the giant did not respond and seemed to be long gone. Instead, his response came in a series of screeching, hollering, and frightening caws from great black birds who swooped from the high shelves of the giant's abode down upon his head. Rorgor was so befuddled and overwhelmed by the bombardment of birds that he huddled into his knees and buried his long nose in the cold, fizzy mud. However, the birds saw the shiny bells woven through his cloak, and they were taken with the greenest of eyes, and so began to pick and pluck at his prized cloak. Rorgor had stitched it well, though, and instead of retrieving any of his prized bells from its tapestry, the birds picked him up and began swinging him about, trying to loosen the stitches on something. Now Rorgor recognized he was being tossed about by crows when he finally peered through the fingers he had wrapped over his eyes. For no reason at all, besides perhaps the blind confidence of a slightly dumb creature, Rorgor had convinced himself he knew how to speak crow. His education in this matter was restrained to hearing crows in the treetops and deciding what their various curs and caws meant. In other words, he had no real reason to believe he knew crow, but that did not stop little Rorgor from bellowing out a series of cacophonic, rattling screeches, barely approximating a crow's much more pleasant caw. Now, you might imagine that this would do little, if anything, at all, good or bad, but Rorgor had accidentally spoken crow. In fact, he insulted the entire crow community, bellowing about their mothers in a manner not befitting even the wildest corners of the swamp's polite society, as he was swung from talon to claw and beak and back. So shocked were the crows by this incisive, if slightly mispronounced, insults, their beaks dropped open under wide black eyes and dropped little Rorgor hard in the mud. He scrambled up in a daze and sputtered to clear his mouth of the thick mud that swamped about the giant's doorstep. The crows were circling for another dive bomb. Rorgor pulled his dingling old cloak from his shoulders and bore it between his soft, supple belly and the sharp beaks of those insulted crows. Swoosh and snap, the crows circled back and back again against the woven old poncho. Rorgor, still of the persuasion that he could speak bird, spit out strings of nonsense caws and gurgling, frankly offensive crowish words. But in the dumb luck that had marked out much of his lazy life, Rorgor managed to string together some words of peace. He said, quite unbeknownst to himself, really, that he wanted no conflict and meant no offense. As he held his bell-ridden garment high, the crows understand this to now be his gift, or perhaps even an apology. Crows are, of course, dignified folk, and so left at his feet a pack of fairly fresh gooseberries plucked, from the back of the giant they had driven away from their nest, which was, of course, in the giant's home, but what do crows know of private property anyhow? Rorgor was so delighted to find his first ingredient, he mindlessly dropped his cloak in the mud to pick them up. The crows swept in for their perceived gift, and well, for a moment, Rorgor considered asking in crow for his jacket back. He instead counted himself lucky, then splooshed off back into the hiding shadows of Tendervale's fizzy, mucky mud. And that's just one ingredient. You're supposed to do 3 in a day. You don't have to write that elaborate of a story. Like I always write, I think, more than any of these games assume you will write, because I'm a writer. That's what I do. But yeah, I really enjoyed this game. I'll definitely play it again. If anybody out there makes their own version, your version of being a swamp troll witch, the character as you would imagine yourself, knowing the stats and stuff is good for playing it yourself, but you can also just sort of design yourself as a little troll in a swamp. I'd be delighted to see the art you come up with. That would be great. You can you can send it to me on Mastodon. If you want. Or you can link it to something in the comments, although I will say that YouTube comments doesn't really like links. Anyways, let's go back to the right music here. That means that I've come to the end of the show, which I was absolutely delighted to do this show with you folks out in the audience. Jenna and GS, thank you for your lovely ideas. I don't think I could have written the story without you. And again, if you guys want to try the story yourself, I will have it in a pinned comment below if you're not watching this live. And, beyond that, you don't have to go home. In fact, you can wander all around Tendervale Swamp and all its fizzy wonders. But you can't stay in the barrel with Rorgor. Not that you'd want to anyways, because, he doesn't bathe that much. He's a troll. So you don't have to go home. But you can't physically handle the stench of Rorgor. So get out of his barrel.